Labor and Employment Relations Association annual meeting and spring conference. Ordinarily, we meet September through, well, our normal cycle, September through April. We have a lunchtime speaker session that occurs when we're in person at the Boathouse restaurant. This past year, we've been doing this virtually. But in May, we always kind of mix things up a little bit and have an extended program so that we have a chance to deal with a couple of different topics. And then after that program, we'll have a brief membership meeting. All of you are certainly welcome to attend. If you are not a member of COLERA, officially, you can pay your dues now for next year. Go to our website and we'll put the link in the chat for you to be able to do that. But this is a great organization. It's an opportunity for people from labor, from management, and neutral parties to come together to understand different trends in the workplace, how everything from collective bargaining to changes in the law and policy issues are affecting how we interact with one another. We include both public and private sector organizations, and we're also very proud that we were recognized by the National Labor and Employment Relations Association as a Star Chapter Award winner for this year because of the ongoing program. And this is an organization that's been around for a long time in Central Ohio. My name is Scott Tempore. I'm the president of the Ohio Education Association. I have served as president of COLERA also for the last 2 years. I will be moving on to the position of past president after today. And our incoming president, Mita Bass, unfortunately is not able to be with us because she's in an arbitration hearing today as we speak, but excited that you're all with us. I'm especially excited about our first keynote speaker this afternoon, Councilwoman Elizabeth Brown. Councilwoman Brown has been a leader not just in Columbus, but at the state level and in national policy circles, talking about issues and researching issues related to family leave and how government at various levels can influence opportunities for working parents and others who have responsibility for taking care of others in their family to continue working productively and be able to fulfill their family responsibilities. And so we invited her to share some of those trends, things that we're seeing nationally and locally, and how that all interplays with, as we think about the labor management context for all of that. So thank you, Liz, for being with us. She does a great job representing and leading the citizens of the city of Columbus. I've considered her a friend for a long time, and really glad that you are with us. So Liz, with that, I will turn it over to you. It is 2:05. This session goes until 3 o'clock. Just for everybody's benefit, we'll have a 15-minute break from 3 to 3:15. And then our second session, which will be our panel of arbitrators sharing trends that they've been experiencing, will begin at 3:15. And then I encourage everybody to then stick around we'll have a short membership meeting at 4:30, and we will be completely finished by 4:45. So Liz, I'll leave it up to you in terms of how you want to handle Q&A and all that kind of stuff, but this session will go till 3 o'clock. So I'll turn it over to you, Councilwoman.
Great. Thank you, Scott. It is so great to be with all of you, and thank you, Scott, for inviting me. You know, I'm really here because of the policy that we got done in the city of Columbus. I mean, I talk about paid family leave a lot, but in terms of implementing through the collective bargaining process, I'm here because of that policy we passed. And I see some folks who I think we could probably just interchange with me and give this whole spiel themselves, like between Brooke and Susan and I haven't kept up on everybody who's joined, so there may be even more. So I just want to acknowledge that there are folks on the line who are really important to this getting done. Um, I don't have a PowerPoint. I am going to just talk, which I hope will keep your attention. But I will tell you that either through the chat function or simply by, probably if you raise your hand, I won't see. But if you just speak up, either through the chat or through speaking up, you are more than welcome to ask questions throughout this presentation. And then, of course, at the end, I will stop probably before 2:45 to allow for questions so that we'll have more than 15 minutes. And Q&A is always the best part of any presentation anyway, because it actually calibrates the content to what's on your minds. So I'll start with just a little bit of background on paid family leave. The United States is one, and you may know some of this, but I think it's really important for us to think about our position globally. And when we talk about trends in workplaces, right here in Central Ohio, we are responsive to the trends happening statewide that are responsive to national, that are responsive to global. So that's kind of where I'm starting when I think about paid family leave too, because the United States is one of really only 2 nations worldwide that does not have some form of legally protected, guaranteed paid time off for new parents. New mothers is the most prominent kind, although we are one of a narrowing few developed nations without similar, maternity leave type provisions for new fathers or paternity leave. At the same time, that's parental leave, right? Welcoming a new baby into the family. And by the way, it's important to recognize new babies come into families in all kinds of ways, sometimes through a birth parent, sometimes adoptive, and sometimes foster. But at the same time as that, the US is also confronting a looming elder care crisis. I am not saying that people who turn 65 are elders, but in terms of staying ahead of trends, it's good to know, as it is a looming crisis, that 10,000 Americans turn 65 every day. 10,000 people in this country turn 65 every day. When a healthcare crisis hits, people look to family members first, usually women, which is why I do think paid family leave disproportionately impacts women's presence and participation in the workforce. And women often suffer loss of wages in order to make time for their caregiving duties. So again, thinking about this sort of family care crisis, there are those who are aging who need the support of children. They typically look to daughters. But even siblings, often, in a sibling relationship, a woman would take care of a sibling or an uncle, or women are just often looked to, disproportionately so, in families to provide the care. That depression of wages I just mentioned, that can really add up. When AARP did a study of this, they found that women on average can lose about $350,000 in lifetime earnings due to the disproportionate amount of caregiving responsibilities. So again, there's no national policy in place that provides for this. You all know what FMLA is. FMLA in reality, my guess is, applies to all the folks that you represent in various forms on this call. But when you're talking about the workforce overall, FMLA really only covers between 60 and 70% of Ohioans. And the reason that's a wishy-washy number is that many employers fall below the FMLA threshold. But then when I think about FMLA really covering people, it can only cover someone who's able to take it. And if you make a low enough wage that you cannot take even guaranteed leave, that your job will be there, but you cannot take those hours off, you cannot take that time off, you cannot sacrifice that pay, is that benefit really even in place for you? So I just want to be clear about the limitations of FMLA. But when paid family leave is present, it's proven to have numerous benefits for the family, the person receiving the care, and also the employer. And if it benefits the employer, it benefits the region or the economy, right? So some of those benefits are improved health outcomes for babies, such as lower infant mortality rates, more frequent well baby visits, higher vaccination rates, better bonding. And bonding is important. And I think that's really where new fathers can gain a lot from having access to paternity leave. There have been some interesting European studies where paternity leave is more present, more widely utilized, that demonstrate when fathers have taken paternity leave, it leads to better educational outcomes among children in elementary school and beyond, in part because when there are two parents present to provide that continuity of care, ultimately it does redound to a child's benefit. Another benefit, so that's for those receiving the care. And then another benefit is for the whole family. So I mentioned the amount of income that women end up sacrificing for caregiving responsibilities. Imagine if they didn't have to sacrifice that, and families were able to earn, that missing $350,000 in lifetime earnings. Could actually earn that and put it to use for their families and their long-term needs. And then the third thing I mentioned was the benefit for employers. Multiple studies have proven the link between reduced turnover and access to paid leave. The presence of a paid leave benefit contributes to better workplace productivity, and knowing that your employer has your back when you need it the most. That does mean real dollars saved in attracting employees, right? They're going to come to a better benefit package, but then also saving those dollars on retraining, if we're able to retain employees. So, while progress towards a national policy remains uncertain, and there are lots of efforts, and private companies, large companies with the means are demonstrating a trend towards adopting better paid family leave policies. When I looked at it as a Columbus City Council member, we did not have a full paid family leave policy in place. We had a disability leave program for birth mothers. And again, that is one slice, not something to sneeze at, but one slice of the paid family leave benefits that should be available. I looked at that as implementing something would be good for our employees, but ultimately I look at it as an employer as well. And I'm really proud that we can serve as a model employer with our own policy for city employees. I think it means that we can attract employees better and hopefully keep them better. I also think we have a lot of room to grow within our current benefit as well. So again, the importance of, we went from a disability leave benefit available to birth mothers to one that was fully inclusive. That disability leave excludes fathers, many same-sex couples, adoptive parents, all kinds of things. So it's really important, I think, to get it right when you're talking about adopting a paid family leave policy. We shouldn't be narrow. We should really be thinking about the needs. Those who didn't have access to actual paid time did have FMLA, but I did I did go into the limitations there of FMLA and just being clear that FMLA really is only available to you if you work for a certain kind of employer, right? Large, or mid-sized to large, and if you make enough money to be able to sacrifice those working hours. Many Ohioans do not fall into that category. One study showed that as many as 60% of Ohioans actually didn't fall into those categories together, making high enough wages to sacrifice the hours and being at an employer that actually is required to comply with FMLA. So in my initial years of council, I worked with our HR team And I met with, U.S. Department of Labor officials, local and national think tanks, to try to, peer cities to try to find a good benefit. And through that work, we came up with a comprehensive paid leave policy for city employees. And it was the first really comprehensive one of its kind in the Midwest, the third like it nationally. So I want to outline a little bit about what that program is. And I want to emphasize that we got this done at the city where we have multiple collective bargaining units. Our goal was to create something, and I'll just be 100% blunt about my perspective during this. I really felt that a comprehensive policy allows employees to access that paid time off, and that it should be pretty universal across the board for each of our collective bargaining units. We implemented both a paid parental leave and a paid caregiver leave policy. Instead of calling it one thing, paid family leave, we did two different benefits. And I don't think you have to do it that way. It was maybe a little clearer to some employees about which kind of benefit they were accessing and how it applied to their situation. And those benefits complement already existing leave options, such as vacation, sick, and personal. I'm going to talk you through what each of those benefits is. Please ask questions if you have them. And then also I want to point out that this is just how we did it. It doesn't mean it's the only way to do it. I think in fact, our policy could be more progressive and actually be a bigger win for the city as an employer. But I think what's important about it is recognizing the full complement of paid family leave benefits that should be accessible for all employees, and that's parental and caregiver, whether it's one program or two. And then it needs to be paid, right? Those are the main important policies. And really, ideally, it's gender neutral as well. If what we're really trying to do is create an equal workplace where women and men can participate equally in the workforce, things like the pay equity gap can be closed. We really need to think about how we're offering the same benefits to women and men and expecting them to take them up at the same rates. That affects what happens in the home. It affects the way employees can contribute at the workplace and so much more. So first step, paid parental leave. This is modeled after a state of Ohio program in place actually since 1997, and it provides up to 6 weeks of leave for full-time regular FMLA eligible employees. The leave is triggered by the birth or adoption of a child. If the employee is a biological parent of either sex, a spouse or domestic partner or legal guardian, and the child resides with the employee. Those are the qualifications to trigger it. The benefit begins with an initial 2 weeks of leave for each, or for those initial 2 weeks, for which employees may use their accrued leave time, or take unpaid leave, if that makes sense. Those initial 2 weeks are kind of like a waiting period. It's then followed by 4 weeks of leave at 70% of regular pay. Employees may supplement their pay up to 100% during the 6 weeks of leave. And the benefit is addition to, but runs concurrent with any short-term disability benefit associated also with childbirth. So I want to note that the way the city chose to do it, which is at a percentage of pay, is not necessarily how every employer does it. Some go up to 100%. There are some small businesses even here in our city, paid leave advocates themselves, who supplement pay at 100%. They just fully replace pay during the leave. We have decided to do that 70% and then allow for an employee to use their accrued leave to make up to 100% of their salary. When we passed this plan, the city negotiated the benefit with our collective bargaining units, and it was contingent on their acceptance as well. Um, that is, I think, a critical thing to spend a moment on. Um, there was a lot of just talk back and forth about how this could work with, within the collective bargaining context, when we first pursued this. And our contracts are distinct from one another. We have 5 in the city. They're each distinct from one another. They do not even come up at the same time. Each of those collective bargaining units looks very different pay scales, different kinds of employees, different duties. And really, my approach to this is that this should just be a universal, consistent benefit that comes along with working at the City of Columbus. The way I see it, every person, one thing we have in common is that when we arrive at the door of our workplace, we don't boot up like a computer and then at the end of the day, power down and like just exist in a state of unconsciousness until we boot up again the next morning, right? We are like full, living, breathing, fully dimensional, 3-dimensional people with 360 degrees of needs and family and obligations. And so, as different as each of our collective bargaining units is, I don't mean to overstate this, but the one thing we have in common is that we're all human and we all have these needs outside the workplace. So I felt really passionately that our paid family leave program should be consistent as well. And that was hard because there are other benefits that are different unit by unit. AFSCME versus FOP or the firefighters or CWA. So we really had to work through it one by one with the union presidents. And what we did, again, because it's council, it's a legislative body, public sector, the HR, our HR folks worked to generate an MOU that was pretty consistent across the bargaining units. I worked with the presidents of the unions to agree with this MOU that had basically a universal benefit and not, extract any, not use it for management to get something else from them. That was one concern we heard from union presidents. So we tried to do it as a distinct process. We brought these MOUs up. I haven't told you the full paid caregiver leave plan yet, but we brought these MOUs up for paid parental leave and paid caregiver leave at a council meeting, passed them so that the union presidents could sign along with management. So that was the process that gave us paid parental leave and paid caregiver leave. Paid caregiver leave has a lot of similarities with paid parental leave. It was not something that we had offered in the past. So one request by our human resources was and the administration really was to make it a pilot to assess the costs and benefits. When we were modeling the costs for this, we could, with some, I think, certainty, predict-ish what the cost might be for the parental leave, because we could see how often city employees added a newborn to their health insurance, right? We could kind of compare some life event stuff that happens internally with the birth rate of the county and get a pretty good idea. Our employee pool is pretty representative of the overall county and has a similar birth rate to the county. So we could kind of guess at the cost that way. But the paid caregiver leave, we didn't know how to predict that. And so the administration asked for a pilot to assess those costs and assess how it worked out for our employees, the benefits of a caregiver leave model. During the second round of implementation, we made this benefit permanent through MOUs with the bargaining units. So that process initially made the parental leave a permanent benefit, made a pilot out of caregiver leave, and then we did 2 years later make it permanent through MOUs with the bargaining units. That leave worked well for a lot of our employees. It provides up to 4 weeks of leave. Again, full-time regular FMLA eligible employees. It can be used for the employee's spouse, son, daughter, or parent who has a serious health condition. So this is really follows closely with what FMLA allows for. And then it follows FMLA rules regarding the definition of a serious health condition too. The benefit includes the 2 weeks of unpaid leave, which can be supplemented, and then 2 weeks of 70% regular pay, which can be supplemented. So that's essentially how we structured it to try to take these things into account. I heard, we have almost 9,000 employees at the City of Columbus. So I don't want to act like this was some dinky program. It really applied to a lot of families. And I think that in a way, whether it was the life cycle of paid family leave trends that we happened to get ourselves in on, or whether it's something we catalyzed on the local level, I know that since the adoption of our program for the city, we've seen other agencies like the commissioners, the auditor, the recorder, all of Franklin County adopt their own policies, different, unique to their own organizations. And then, of course, it isn't just Central Ohio that's moving in this direction. The Family Act being considered at the federal level would help workers access partial funding for the 12-week period of job protected leave that currently exists under FMLA. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that families actually utilize 12 weeks of leave when welcoming a new child. So there are all these local and national efforts that are crystallizing, I think, as more people talk about paid family leave, and I think are bringing us closer to, as an overall economy, getting closer to this benefit being provided for employees. The last thing on the trends piece I'll say is that if you remember a little more than a year ago, when COVID-19 pandemic hit and the federal government had to respond, they did several key things. But one of those was passing paid family leave. They recognized when we're in crisis, it matters how we support families. And I think that was really telling when they did that. Now, they made it short term and only applied to the pandemic, but we really shouldn't pull the wool over our eyes after the pandemic and pretend, that it's only during the pandemic people have, again, these 360-degree lives where we have to care for folks, for our families outside of work. And that those things interact with each other, and actually our ability to perform at work is very much informed by what we can do for our families at home. So I think that the last year has been not only a lesson in the fact that childcare is infrastructure, but also this idea that supports for families, paid family leave, these are infrastructure issues too. And I firmly believe that our government should get behind this on a federal level. I hear from a lot of small businesses that they don't feel they can do what we did at the city because they just don't have a way to stay in the black, right? And do things that way, that they would fear losses if they offered a program like this. And that's probably, I don't do their books, but that's probably very real for them. And one of the reasons why the federal government, I believe, has to step up. In like the next 5-6 minutes, I'm going to do two things. One, turn my camera off and walk through my house and get my charger so that my computer doesn't die. But two, I will actually stay on the computer and read to you some employee testimonials that we did get. So I'll still be entertaining you as I do that, but I really don't want my computer to die on you. And I won't make you witness my house because we just moved and it's a disaster zone. So here we go. You are just seeing my name now, but what I'm going to do for you is talk you through some of these employee testimonials that we received when kind of asking for feedback for our program. So the first one, I just came back to work after utilizing my 6 weeks off and just wanted to relay how beneficial this program was for taking care of my spouse and newborn. Due to serious complications in her pregnancy, my wife had to be induced 6 weeks early, and we had to spend time in the NICU with our new baby at Mount Carmel West before his release. My wife and I are very grateful that this program was available for us during those times and made the whole ordeal much easier to cope with. So that was one about a newborn. Found my charger. The next one, my wife had SI joint surgery, which is a very painful surgery. The doctors told us that the recovery was 6 to 8 weeks and that my wife was not allowed to walk or put any weight on her leg for 6 weeks. I am the sole income for my family, 3 little girls and my wife. Having to take this time off work was very stressful. Then I was made aware of the paid caregiver leave program. I am forever grateful for this service. It means a lot that the city will help an employee when their spouse or parent is ill or incapacitated. I have been able to stay with my wife and take care of her without worrying about leave time. I hope this program continues and that more employees are made aware of it. Then the last one is I utilized the paid caregiver leave this past spring to take care of my son. He is 6 years old and diabetic and unable to manage his diabetes himself. And therefore, we have to have a trained caregiver for him. Our nanny quit and I was unable to find a replacement in a timely manner and or at least someone who was capable of the additional duties with the diabetic care. With the PCL, I was able to care for him. That's paid caregiver leave. I was able to care for him while finding a suitable nanny and train her to handle his condition. It was very stressful. Had it not been for the leave program, I'm not sure what I would have done. Thank you for the additional time. So those are my testimonials. And I just had to walk up the stairs twice because when I went to get my charger, I only got half of it. So I just did that twice. You can tell I don't work out during this pandemic because I'm out of breath. All right, I will stop there. It is 2:34. I have talked so much, but there's a lot of great information I wanted to get out to you guys. And I would just, love to hear if there are thoughts or questions, or if any of my Columbus folks have things to add to what I've said so far. And here I am on screen again.
There you go. Hey,
Thanks
Liz,
for bearing with me.
I'll throw out the first question as kind of and I don't know if you addressed it directly, but what has been the cost of implementing the program, and can you talk a little bit about both like what the financial impact, the budget impact on the city of this beyond existing leave programs that were already in place, and then what have been some of the trade-offs for the city, in terms of the impact of this?
Yeah, so on cost, a couple things that are interesting is that depending on what kind of individual that is taking the leave, there is sometimes the city technically saves money on someone. So think about like my aide on council. I have a legislative assistant and a legislative aide. My legislative assistant, his wife had a baby. He took 6 weeks of paternity leave. During that time, he made a percentage of his pay, right? And we didn't hire a replacement for him. I picked up more work. My aide picked up more work. So I'm not saying there's zero cost, but financially, the city actually just saved a portion of his income for those 6 weeks. So when we looked at this, we had to think about what kind of individuals are working, how many of them would be like James, my legislative aide or assistant, and how many of them would be more like a shift worker, refuse truck driver who would then, they'd need to backfill that position, with someone's overtime. So those hours are still being worked. We had, I am like very embarrassed to say this, but I think the cost as we had originally projected it at the time that we did the modeling, I'm not going to remember the exact amount. It was in the single digit millions, like I think 1.5 to 2 million of our budget, which is about $900 million. So it was a small cost that we modeled. Now, going forward, we've never had to put a line item in our budget to cost out this program, because what ends up happening, and this is what Dayton's experience was, Dayton did this, they didn't do caregiver leave, they did just parental leave. And we asked them how they afforded this with their shift workers or hourly workers, I guess is the better way to put it, right? These positions you'd have to backfill. And they said that it was cost neutral because they can plan for folks overtime and there wasn't a significant change. So really, I mean, I'm the chair of our finance committee and we don't have, which passes the budget for city council, we don't have a line item in our budget that says paid family leave program, because ultimately it is not a cost driver for the city.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Sure.
And I'll say a little bit more on trends too, that, we, right now, when you look at the workforce nationally, I don't have the numbers globally, or I would tell you them, but nationally, when you look at the numbers, we really see about 21% of the civilian workforce with access to this benefit. So I think any employer who chooses to offer paid family leave is generally providing a benefit that is still now, considered on the cutting edge for employees. You've seen some states start to pass state-sponsored paid family leave, and you're seeing some energy around it for the federal government. And that is because the need for it is being more widely recognized. But it's not a majority of the workforce that has this benefit yet. I think it is a really important one in terms of an attraction package for employees, not just millennials who are starting families, but really workers of all ages, because you're incorporating parental and caregiver. Again, on the trend side, the most common benefit is paid parental leave. We are definitely an early adopter on the caregiver side. But as you heard from those testimonials, it is just as important as paid parental leave. And, I think to offer that to your employees sends a really powerful message. If you'll permit me to get a little, personal here, I remember when my mother was caring for my grandmother, who has since passed. And some of you may be able to relate to this. It was a hard time for her. It was a painful time for her. It was not something that she spoke a lot about because it was a sad time, right? And in many ways, that's very opposite to most, really in all ways, that's very opposite to at least most experiences with bringing a newborn home. So when your employer has your back during a time that you're losing a parent, or at least a parent is managing a very serious health crisis, again, as defined under these FMLA health conditions, that's huge. The appreciation that we heard from those testimonials, and there are a lot more where that came from, we just picked 3, is significant, and I think it's consequential to that relationship between the employer and the employee, which really matters when we're talking about managing large organizations. But again, trend-wise, it is still, caregiver is not as common as parental. Are there any other thoughts or questions? Or, I mean, I'm curious how many of you feel that this is something your organization, that you whether your employees or the employer themselves could actually benefit from, would pick it up. I'm curious.
And again, feel free to just unmute yourself and jump into the conversation.
And Scott, I know for you, you represent a lot of individual school districts, all over the state. So there's really not one universal approach. And I actually don't know with teachers if the caregiver leave has been taken up by many districts or not. I would sometimes, a profession like teaching, you might think was early to come to the parental leave benefit because of the age of many teachers, but I don't even know if that's really true, to be honest.
Yeah, I can, and I think, again, most districts, we have statutory sick leave. We have FMLA, which does apply, in almost all of our settings, if not all of our settings. But we have seen in the last couple of years a number of locals that have bargained for expanded paid leave, particularly for childbirth and childcare. So, so Worthington, which is where it's my local, I think in their last contract, they bargained 12 weeks paid leave for birth mothers and 6 weeks paid leave for basically everybody else. So adoptive parents and fathers, and that was partially because part of it was an equity issue, because the practice had been that, if you had a doctor who was willing to write a medical excuse, then you essentially would have, paid leave. But there were all kinds of inequities with that.
Yeah.
And so I think the desire was to try to make it more equitable. It's not there completely, but that's generally what's happening. As far as caregiver leave, I am not familiar with a lot of our locals that have gone in that direction.
Yeah. I think it's a benefit that as the boomer population ages and as millennials become that generation caring for boomers, you will actually see the demand for caregiver go up. That's not an immediate thing, but that's, I think a coming issue, and an interesting one for sure. We're not quite there yet, but we need to be, I think, eyes wide open about what it will take when we are there as a nation, in addition to our workplaces, one by one. We did get a question in the chat about a leave donation plan. Sue Wadley says that we currently offer a leave donation plan, and it's an interesting concept. How would you recommend someone sell it to upper management? Sorry if that was my computer. So I'll take that actually sort of two parts. The leave donation plan in general, I think if that's what your workplace is open to, then that is certainly better than having no options. I do think that it is, if we're really talking about an equitable, fair approach for people to have what they need when crisis hits, it is hard. I have a friend who really tragically lost her baby at the very end of her pregnancy. She was basically full term, and she technically qualified for like a 3-day bereavement leave because of the timing of the baby's death, because it matters whether the baby is born a stillborn or dies once she's given birth. And this is absolutely tragic and never a conversation you want to have. And she was understandably a wreck. And she was in the position at her workplace, which had a leave donation program, to have to be making these requests of her employers at the of her colleagues at the hardest possible time in her life. And so I just think that again, it is definitely better than nothing to have that flexibility, and employees are unbelievably generous with one another at very hard times. But to really think about when it's being used by people, it's not an ideal benefit for those circumstances. But then the last part of your question was, how would you recommend someone sell it to upper management? So I would take that part of the question, lob it off, and apply it just generally how to sell it to and recommend a paid family leave or any kind of benefit plan to an employer. What I would stress is the what I said at the beginning about how much this can save employers when you think about attraction costs and retention costs of employees. That the pandemic is actually a good window into this. So think about the number of women who have just pulled out of the workforce. There are women who couldn't afford to keep working because between the low wage that they made and the childcare demands the pandemic had of them, the equation didn't add up anymore. There are also women who could not, maybe their salary allowed them to make that choice, but their mental health and well-being of their family no longer allowed them to make that choice. And so they voluntarily exited the workforce. Basically, when workplaces and our society couldn't accommodate what women needed for their families, women pulled out of the workforce. That has a cost to every single one of us. In the billions of dollars, the costs are to our economy. I didn't pull these numbers beforehand, so I don't have these in front of me, but there's been significant research by Forbes and others to look at what the dampening of women's workforce participation has caused, what economic fallout that's caused during this recession. This pandemic has disproportionately impacted women more than men. That's a huge example. But if we want to encourage women to return to the workplace, or the women who are still working to stay in the workforce, and again, therefore benefit all of us throughout the economy, our policies have to match that. So if you're trying to sell a paid family leave policy to management, to upper management, I would emphasize that women have shown us over the last year what happens in the extremes when they can't balance it all. Little tiny versions of that, micro examples of that happen in the American economy every day of every year of decades and decades long. It just happened all at once during the pandemic. So that's our proof. Let's think about ways to keep women at the table, to narrow that pay gap, to make sure the economy is working for all of us, and to make sure all of us feel that benefit of more workforce participation. You could also look up the actual numbers on retraining employees in your sector. I think there's some back of the napkin broad stroke math that says it's like $12,000 to retrain for a position or something, but I wouldn't feel comfortable giving that to you to use because I'm sure it's different in every sector, but you might be able to find something like that that actually puts brass tacks to it.
Other questions? I've got a whole list, but I don't want to monopolize the Q&A.
I'm happy to answer questions as long as needed, or give everyone an early break, whatever is needed. There's, this topic is an important one, I think, to our workplaces and our families. And there's, lots more you can sort of read up and educate yourself further afterward too, especially as it relates to your own workplace.
Any examples of private employers that have successfully implemented comparable paid family leave policies, and any data on how that's worked out for them?
So Deloitte is the one major example of a private sector employer who's done a comprehensive leave benefit, where they have, I think, 6 months of parental leave. And I think up to 12 weeks of caregiver leave, if I'm remembering it correctly. Might be 6, but I think it's 12, and then 6 months of parental. The trend in a lot of these Silicon Valley companies is 6 months of parental leave. Um, and it sounds really overly generous as an American, but I mean, the UK has 6 months, Canada has 12. And the UK is not the most, liberal European country by any stretch of the imaginations, but they're at 6 months. So the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that a newborn's parents take 6 months of leave for them. So those are a lot of the trends we're seeing. And so far it is working from what we can tell. I don't have their internal data on cost and things, but what I can tell you from knowing that many of them started implementing these programs in the 3-4 year ago time horizon, they it has become a bit of like competitive edge now. A lot of the Silicon Valley companies and sort of New York companies, I think Deloitte's based out there, that are offering these are competing with each other now to make sure that their benefit plan is looked at as leading the pack, because it helps them secure employees. So for what that's worth, I do think it must be succeeding.
Other questions or comments? I guess the one last thing that I'm kind of curious about is the if there is agreement that this is a direction that makes sense, and there's evidence that the benefits outweigh the costs, and that the costs of not doing this in some ways are greater than the cost of doing it. Does it make sense to have an approach that is essentially employer by employer? Do it through collective bargaining, do it through policy, or in an ideal world, would this be federal law, or would this be state law, or would this be something that, I don't know that the city has the authority to require this, for all employers in the city, but I mean, is this more, and maybe it's a both and, question, but does it make sense to deal with this primarily as a public policy issue or as a labor employment issue?
I mean, I'll be honest, I think it makes more sense as a public policy issue. Absent action on the state or federal, really ideally federal level so far, I do think employers need to step up to the table, because it's so important for families. There's a small business here called Geben Communications that has led the GEBEN, as in Nancy Geben, that has led the small business conversation from the local level, sometimes state, sometimes national level. She has a little toolkit you can go on and actually like plug in it's like crowdsourcing how small businesses make this work, basically, which I love, but frankly, I think there is enough to do as a small business. It is really hard to also make this work. And the reason it's a public policy measure is that reason that employer by employer, it is hard to do and to figure out, but B, for the same reason that we have a minimum wage, right? Before the minimum wage, in certain times, the only pay you could get for a day's work was, a quarter what it took to live. And then when workers were at a shortage, you could get a little more, and that's no way to live, right? Like there's a reason the federal minimum wage was passed. And of course, at the time, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, decried it as socialism. So we hear that happen every time we talk about important social infrastructure policy. And they're ultimately, the chamber is on the wrong side of history in those things, as I think they will be when, and I say when, we finally get a federal paid family leave policy passed.
All right. Thank you, Liz. One last chance if anybody has a final question or comment. But hearing none and seeing none, really appreciate your taking the time to be with us. Originally, this was on our docket for May of 2020, and then COVID got in the way. And so we're glad that you were able to come back this year and join us. And I encourage you to join COLERA also and come to our third Tuesday of the month, speaker luncheons at the Boathouse.
Awesome.
Yeah, and for everybody, if you're not paying attention to the chat, first off, follow the announcements. If you are taking today's or here today for CLE credit, there is an occasional need to enter your name and your attorney number in the chat. That's how we track that and report it back to the Supreme Court. And also I put in the chat that you have, we do have the link for membership. Regular dues are just $25 a year. When we get back to our in-person settings, that gets you a discount on the luncheon cost. So it more than pays for itself.
Scott.
And if you're a student or retired, then you get a discount on that. Yes.
Sorry, I was just going to say, we have a couple individuals who have not put their name in a second time for the first hour of the CLE. We do require that everybody, if they're going to get that hour's worth, they do need to put their name in twice each hour. So for anybody who has not put their name in a second time for the first hour, you will probably only get a half an hour CLE credit, just a fair warning. So if you have not put your name in a second time, please, now would be a good time. Otherwise, I will have to tell you, you're only going to get a half an hour, because otherwise I will have the Supreme Court breathing down my neck.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Thank you to you and Kate for setting up the CLE credit opportunity. So again, thank you, Councilwoman Brown. And we are going to take a 15-minute break. Actually, it'll be a couple minutes longer than that. We will start at 3:15 sharp, and Chris Hasselberger, who you just heard from, is going to introduce our next panel of speakers, our panel of arbitrators who are going to be sharing their presentation, again, starting at 3:15. So I'm just going to turn off my, my camera and my microphone. You're welcome to do that yourselves, or if you want to log out and log back in, that's really up to you. But we are on break for the next 15 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, Liz.
Bye, Susan.